Hey, this is YouTube celebrity and granter of wishes, Adrian Jensen. Pretty much every time I put out a tutorial, I have people asking me how I make my titles. This fake, hand-drawn, drippy, nasty, gooey look, which I don't really have a better name for than that. This isn't really going to be one of my short, fun little episodes. It's going to be more of a longer, serious tutorial. With that being said, let's get right to it. Alright, so this is a new project in After Effects. I will admit to you guys that I am doing this in a much lower resolution than I normally would, and that's because this effect is really render heavy, and I just don't want to make you guys sit around forever and sit through that. I'm lying, it's really for me because I'm going to edit that out anyway. But the reason I'm telling you is that your detail will probably look better if you do this in a higher resolution. So, we need to start with some text. I'm just going to use this white text. And you want to put it in like a fun, like thick font to make it look pretty good. Actually, you know, I've never tried it with like a regular non-fun font before. I can't even tell you that I know how it looks because I don't. And let's just go ahead and pre-compose this. And we can just call that text. And it will help to save on render time if we go into that comp and use this region of interest and kind of draw a box around our type. And then go to crop comp to region of interest. And that'll, that way we only have exactly the area that we need. And that'll help speed it up a little bit. So we have this, it's no longer text, now it's just kind of a rasterized layer. And you can go ahead and make it 3D because we're going to use it as an emitter for trapcode particular. So let's add a new solid to it, and let's add particular. And we want our particles to be coming off of our text, and this is eventually going to become like our gross goo or whatever. So let's set up a layer emitter and set the layer to be the text. And we want our layer sampling to be the particle birth time. Alright, and now you would think, since we really just want these to be dripping down, that we don't need any velocity, but I actually like having a little bit of velocity. But of course that's to taste, and you can do whatever you want. But we are going to need to go into the physics and definitely add some gravity. The reason I have the velocity in there is if I didn't, then they would just be falling straight down, right? Which is fine, but I prefer to have a little bit of direction to them. So that's what the velocity does in this case. And I'm actually going to set these to be a cloudlet and bring the size up a little bit. And maybe bring the amount down a little bit. I'm going to alter the size over life. And I'm just going to pick this preset right here and smooth it out a little bit, although I don't think that's going to make much of a difference. And I'm going to change the life to something smaller so they start disappearing before they hit the bottom. Because if you think about this, we're trying to mimic hand-drawn animation, and I think if I was actually having to animate all this stuff, I might want to get rid of these particles as soon as possible. So that's why I'm changing the life down to a smaller number. Because while we don't need the shortcut, if I was animating this by hand, I would. I hope that makes some level of sense. Let's go ahead and see about animating our text on. So let's just go back into the text layer. And there's a couple ways you could do this. You could set up a new solid and add a fractal noise to it. This is really popular. Just increase the contrast, and then you could animate the brightness. And use that as like a lumimat, and that's going to get you something. What I think looks a little bit better is if you just hit it with a simple choker. just choke it out. And then over time, set it back to 0. Right, and I think that's going to look good with the final effect. So let's go back to our comp 1. We've got that animating on. And I just want to move it around a little bit. Now this, if you were actually doing this for some kind of project, you want to put a little thought into like why it's moving around. But like just for the heck of it, just so you can see what's going on, I'm just going to move it kind of randomly. So let's set keyframes for the position and for the Z rotation. And I'm just going to like move it up and over and twist it around a little bit, and then move it down here and twist it more. And that's just kind of to show off that it actually does like fling these particles around when you yank it around like that. If we decide to, we are free to increase the velocity from motion if you want a little bit more of the flinging action. I am going to add a few more of these particles too. So I'm going to change the name of that layer to large particles, and we're going to duplicate it, but call this top one small particles. So for this small particles layer, I'm going to increase the count, and I'm going to change them to be a sphere. And of course we want to lower the size of them, and always change the random seed, of course, so they're not going to be looking the same as these other particles. So we can take our comp 1 and drag it into a new comp to make comp 2. So basically it's been pre-composed. And the magic behind this effect is you add a fast blur, repeat those edge pixels, and then you add a levels, and you set the levels to alpha, and you crush it. You just bring all these triangles into the middle like this, and then you can alter like the amount of your fast blur or the position of your triangles if you don't like it. And that's how you do that. This could also benefit from some motion blur. So if we go to the comp 1 and just turn on the motion blur for all those layers, and then go back to comp 2, you'll see it looks a little different. And when it starts to move really fast, it kind of deforms and doesn't really look like letters anymore, and it's more like an animation smear. And this is good because if I was animating this by hand, when it's moving quickly, I wouldn't bother to spell out the letters perfectly. So we could also benefit from adding a echo effect. We can put it before the fast blur, and you want to set your echo time to something pretty small, and then you can bring up your number of echoes, maybe not that many, and you can add some decay if you want. Oh, and then when we turn that fast blur and the levels back on, it makes it kind of stretch out more our blobs into less of like a spherical shape and more like they actually have some shape to them caused by their momentum, and that's great. So we can duplicate our comp 1, and I'm going to change the name of it to small particles, and open that up, and I'm just going to solo the small particles so there's nothing else in that comp, right? And then come into our current comp, okay, and then just bring those small particles in. Let's solo them for now, and we're going to want to add levels to them, and just like before, set it to alpha, and we're just going to crunch them up so they're not fuzzy like that. Now they're like solid balls instead of just being fluffy like this. We can duplicate that, and to the bottom layer you want to add a fill and just turn that to be black. And then the bottom layer you can just use your arrow key to kind of nudge it down a little bit, and the top layer you can nudge up a little bit, and this is how we get those little outlines around the bottom of the droplets. So if we pre-compose those, and then turn on our comp 1, and if we hit this button here, I don't know what it's called, but it causes this layer to use the transparency of the layers below it. So if we check it, then our particles are not going to appear outside of boundaries set by the layer below. And since we have those outlines down there, we should go ahead and add our outline to our text. Hit layer and go to layer styles, and we can just add a stroke and change the stroke to black. Alright, so this is what we've got so far. The problems I have with it are that it's not very legible, which if we were doing this in a higher resolution, it would be a lot easier to make it more legible. I think the small drops are a little small, and I think the large drops are a little wild. So I'm going to correct those things really quick, and I'm also going to show you that it is within our power to go into this text comp and change this word. And yeah, just to remind you, you can update it that way. You can type whatever you want. So you could just save this comp on your computer if you wanted to do this more than once, and just change the word. Okay, this is looking alright to me. My computer is chugging on this a little bit, but it's not too bad. But if I were doing this in HD, it would be really bad. So I'm just gonna render this out before we continue, because we're done with this portion. But through the power of editing, I will see you immediately. So I've got that word rendered out. It's still going a little faster than I would have liked it to, but that's okay. Now we're just gonna spruce this up a little bit. Everything after this point is optional. You guys have already pretty much learned the effect. This is what I was trying to teach you. Everything after this is extra credit. So I'm gonna add a cool texture to this. So I'm gonna do that by making a new solid and make it like this mint green color, and I'm going to uncheck the scale and make it 33.3% as tall as the comp, so that's a third. And I'll just make a new solid and make it like a pale pink color. Then make a new one that's like a cream color. Okay, and just pre-compose those. And we can add a motion tile effect and decrease the tile height to like shrink it down and get a whole bunch of stripes. Okay, and we can use a offset effect. So we're going to keyframe the center, move it up, and then just keyframe it to fall down. And it's gonna be hard to get it perfect, but I really want it to kind of match the speed of these drips. So that's not fast enough. Okay, that's not perfect, but it's kind of close. It doesn't have to be perfect. It shouldn't be perfect. But now on top of that, we can add a turbulent displace on top of all those effects and kind of turn down the size, turn up the amount. And if you play that, you see the stripes are kind of moving through the turbulence, and they're not really stripes anymore. Now they're more of a drippy, a drippy effect, and that's really what I was going for. So just to make it a little more interesting, I'm going to turn it on its side a little bit, and we can alpha matte this top layer and then set that top layer to multiply. Okay, and now we have that animated texture on there. Another thing we can do is add like a shadow to it, and I like to do that by just duplicating the word, move it down to the bottom, and displace it. It doesn't have to be down, it could be up if you want. I'm going to make it go down. And then add a fill effect to it, which I'll make like a dark green. stroke to the inside of it. Make that black. And then to add a little bit more randomness to it, I kind of like to offset it by a frame or two. Either forward or backward, whatever. Actually, since I've moved it down, if I offset it forward, this will be kind of cool because the letters themselves will have the shadow below them, but the drips will have it above them, like it's kind of trailing. I don't want to do too much, but a little bit. And you see how, when it's moving fast, you see how crazy that gets? Alright. And we can add like just a gray solid in the background. Putting the lips on it. And add a turbulent displace to it. Maybe keyframe the evolution so it's moving a little bit. Duplicate that. Alright, so now we've got that all nice and animated. Now I'm going to try to make it look a little more like it's not made on a computer. So we can add a new adjustment layer and maybe start with a turbulent displace with the amount super low and the size not very big either. Add a wiggle expression to the evolution and just make it wiggle wildly. Maybe also add a slight expression to the amount and the size. Okay, and that's looking pretty jittery, but we are going to fix that when we add the posterized time effect and change it to maybe something like 12 frames a second. Okay, and then something I like to do is add red giant misfire and kind of just apply some of these effects, whichever ones you think look good. I don't have a recipe for it. I just go through, turn them on, turn them off, and keep what I like. Another thing I like to do is maybe add a channel blur and just kind of like go through, take turns turning these up, turning them down, and see if you think one of them looks good. In this case, I'm going to blur the red channel just a little bit. I think it's probably going to be a different channel depending on what kind of colors you have in your scene. And you can blur more than one of them, but if you blur all three of them, you're just going to end up with a blurry image, so maybe you don't want that. But it kind of introduces some funky colors, especially like these outlines are no longer black. I think that's kind of neat. And it definitely looks a little bit more like it's been recorded rather than made on a computer, I think. And then finally, I do have one magic bullet, which is actually a magic bullet. I like to add that on top. And then hit edit. Sometimes I like to add maybe a little chromatic aberration, not always. And I like to put on some lens distortion. But here's the big one. The real reason I use this is I go for the diffusion. And really I drop the diffusion on, but I feel like that effect really adds a lot. And that is our final effect, you guys. I think it came out alright. I think this tutorial is not too hard, but I think the result is worth the effort, definitely. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.